My sister and I live 4 states apart, and we speak on the phone exactly twice a year, once on her birthday, once on mine. We did not have a fight. There was no betrayal, no falling out, no dramatic rupture I could point to and explain to you. We had something quieter than a fight, and in the end, far more destructive, because a fight you can apologize for, but you cannot apologize for this. We had a drift, and I did not understand how far we had drifted, or how much the two of us had quietly thrown away, until I found a cassette tape in a box in my attic and heard the voices of the two girls we used to be. On that tape, my sister and I were 15 and 18 years old, and we were laughing, and we were making each other a promise about the rest of our lives. 40 years later, sitting on my attic floor, I had to face the fact that we had broken it. Not on purpose, not in anger, but completely. I want to tell you what was on that cassette, because it sent me to a telephone with shaking hands, and it taught me something about the quiet way we lose the people we love most. My name is Maureen Walsh, Mo, to the people who knew me young. I am 63 years old, and I worked as a travel agent in Billings, Montana, for most of my adult life, which means I spent 40 years booking other people's journeys to the people and places they loved, and somehow never made the short trip that mattered most. My sister Linda is 66, and she is alive, and she lives in Arizona, and for the better part of 4 decades, she has been less a sister to me than a familiar name on a Christmas card. I'm going to tell you how that happened, and how a cassette tape undid it. But first, you have to understand the drift, because the drift is the whole danger, and almost nobody sees it coming. I have thought a great deal this past year about why nobody warns you about the drift. We get warned about so much. We are told to guard against the friend who betrays us, the relative who takes advantage, the partner who turns cruel. There are 1,000 stories about relationships that end in fire. But there is almost no story about the relationships that end in silence, that just cool, slowly, like a cup of coffee nobody got around to drinking, until one day you notice it has gone stone cold and you cannot remember the last time it was warm. The drift gets no warnings, because it has no drama. It does not feel like losing someone while it is happening. It feels like nothing. It feels like being busy. And that is precisely why it is the thief that empties the most houses, because we are all watching the front door for the dramatic burglar, while the quiet one walks off with everything through a door we left open out of pure inattention. When people lose a sibling relationship, they usually imagine a reason: a screaming match, a betrayal over money, a falling out at a funeral. Linda and I had none of that. What we had was worse, because it had no cause you could fix. We were inseparable as girls. I should tell you a little about what we were, so you understand the size of what we let slip. We shared a room until Linda left for college, twin beds with a nightstand between them, and we talked across that gap every single night until one of us fell asleep mid-sentence. She taught me to ride a bike and to dance, and to stand up to the girls who were cruel to me at school. She covered for me when I snuck out. I covered for her. When our father had his tempers, we had a system of looks across the dinner table that said everything. She was not just my sister. She was my first best friend, my protector, my co-conspirator, the other half of a single childhood. There was no early memory I had that did not have Linda in it somewhere. To go from that, from 2 girls who could not fall asleep without saying goodnight across a dark room, to 2 women who could not fill 15 minutes on the phone twice a year, is a fall so far that I still cannot fully take it in. That was the height we fell from. That is what the drift quietly disassembled, night by uncalled night. 3 years apart, sharing a room in our parents' house in Montana, we were each other's whole world. Partners in crime, keepers of each other's secrets, the 2 Walsh girls against everything. And then we grew up, the way you do. Linda married first and moved to Colorado. I married and stayed in Billings. We were busy in the way young families are busy, and the calls got a little shorter and a little less frequent, and that seemed fine, temporary, the natural cost of building lives. Then Linda moved again, to Arizona, farther away. Our parents passed, first Dad and then Mom, and with them gone, the gravity that had always pulled us back to the same place at the holidays was gone too. There was no more home to come home to, No more mom's table forcing us into the same room twice a year. And without that center, we simply drifted. I have come to think that this is one of the great unspoken dangers of losing your parents, especially for siblings. You do not just lose them, you lose the thing that kept you and your brothers and sisters orbiting the same sun. While our mother was alive, Linda and I had a built-in reason to be in the same room, a fixed point on the calendar, a kitchen we both had to show up in. Mom's house was the gravity that held the whole family in formation, and none of us appreciated that it was doing that job until it was gone. When she died, the formation didn't just lose its center, it lost the only force that had been quietly correcting our drift all along, year after year, by simply requiring us to gather. After that, there was nothing pulling Linda and me back toward each other except our own intention. And intention, it turns out, is a far weaker force than a mother's dinner table. We did not realize we had been relying on Mom to keep us close. We found out only when she was no longer there to do it, and we discovered that on our own, we did not know how. The calls went from monthly to a few times a year to, finally, twice. Her birthday and mine, 15 dutiful minutes each. How are the kids? Fine. How's your health? Fine. Well, take care now. 4 decades of slow, silent, reasonless drift, and not once in all those years did either of us do anything wrong enough to notice. That is the trap. That is exactly the trap. I found the cassette because I was finally cleaning out the attic. I had retired the year before, and my husband and I were thinking of downsizing, and the attic was 40 years of boxes I had never faced. In one of them, under old tax records and my kids' baby clothes, was a shoebox of cassette tapes. Actual cassettes, the kind nobody has played since the 80s. And one of them stopped my heart a little, because it was labeled in my own teenage handwriting, in faded ballpoint, bubbly letters with a little heart over the I. Mo and Linda's Show, 1978. Do not tape over. I held it for a long time before I did anything with it. There was something almost unbearable about that handwriting. The bubbly, hopeful penmanship of a girl who had not yet lived any of the life I had lived, who did not know any of what I knew, who was so sure of her sister that she wrote "Do not tape over" in big, insistent letters to protect a silly afternoon she somehow understood was worth keeping. That girl had been right about one thing and wrong about another. She was right that the tape was worth protecting. She was wrong to think the bond it recorded would protect itself. If only she had known to write that warning on the relationship instead of the cassette. Do not tape over. Do not let the years record something else on top of this. Do not let busyness and distance overwrite what you two are. She protected the tape and forgot to protect the thing the tape was about, which is, I suppose, exactly the mistake I went on to make for the next 40 years. I had no memory of it at all, but I knew I had to hear it. It took me 2 weeks to find a cassette player that still worked. I finally bought one online, an old portable, just for this. Those 2 weeks were their own strange experience. The labeled cassette sat on my kitchen counter the whole time, waiting, and I found myself walking past it and feeling something I could not name, a kind of nervousness, as if the tape were a letter from someone I had wronged. I think on some level I already knew. I think part of me understood, before I ever heard a second of it, that those young voices were going to ask me an uncomfortable question about what I had done with the love they were so sure of. I almost did not buy the player. There was a cowardly little voice that suggested I just throw the box of tapes out unheard, the way you sometimes do, not open a letter you suspect will hurt. I am so grateful I did not listen to that voice. But I want to be honest that it was there, because I think it is the same voice that had kept me from calling my sister for 40 years, the one that says it is easier not to reach, easier not to know, easier to let the quiet stand. And one quiet afternoon, alone in my house, I put the tape in, and I pressed play, and I was not at all ready for what came out of those little speakers. It was us. It was the two of us, 45 years ago, in the bedroom we shared, and I had not heard my sister's young voice, or my own, in longer than I could calculate. We were doing a bit, a pretend radio show, the kind of silly thing bored girls did before the internet. The very fact that the recording existed at all is its own small miracle I keep marveling at. We were of the last generation whose childhoods were mostly not recorded. No phones, no constant video. Our young voices simply gone the moment we spoke them, lost to the air. That one afternoon, on a whim, with a cheap cassette recorder one of us had gotten for a birthday, we happened to capture ourselves, and then the tape got buried in a box and survived 40 years of moves and attics by pure luck. If any one of a dozen things had gone differently, if the tape had been thrown out, taped over, lost in a move, ruined by heat, I would have no recording of my sister's young voice at all, and the drift would have had the last word. Instead, against the odds, those two girls were preserved, waiting in the dark of a box. For the day one of them grew old enough, and sad enough, and lucky enough to finally play them back. I do not take that luck for granted. Most people's young voices are simply gone. Linda was the host, doing an exaggerated announcer voice, introducing the one, the only, Mo Walsh, and I was giggling too hard to play along properly. We sang, badly, gloriously badly, a Fleetwood Mac song we both loved, talking over each other, cracking up. We interviewed each other about the boys we liked, dissolving into the kind of helpless laughter that only happens when you are young and completely safe with another person. I sat on my attic floor and I listened to two girls who loved each other so much, so easily, so totally, that the love just poured off the tape, undimmed by 40 years. What struck me hardest was the sound of the laughter. There is a particular way you laugh with someone when you are completely safe with them, completely known, when there is not one molecule of performance or guardedness left. A loose, helpless, snorting kind of laughter that you simply cannot fake and cannot have with people you are still being careful around. I had not laughed like that in decades, I realized, with anyone. And there it was on the tape, the two of us doing it constantly, easily, as our natural resting state, because that is what we were to each other. The safest place either of us had. Hearing it, I understood the true size of what the drift had taken. It had not just taken a relationship I could list on a form. It had taken the one person on earth in whose company I could be that unguarded, that silly, that wholly myself. I had been walking around for 40 years, missing that specific freedom without ever knowing what I was missing, because the only person who had ever given it to me was 4 states away becoming a stranger. And then, near the end, the silliness settled, the way it does late at night, and the tape caught a quieter moment between us. And that is the part that brought me to my knees. On the tape, my sister, 18, about to leave for college, which is probably why we were being sentimental, got serious for a second. And I want to tell you what she said, because I have listened to it more times than I can count now. She said in her young voice, "Hey Mo, no matter what, even when we're old ladies, we never lose each other, okay? Promise me. Other people drift apart, but not us. We're the Walsh girls. We call each other. We show up. Always." And on the tape, my 15-year-old voice said, "Always. I promise. You're stuck with me forever, Lynn." And we laughed, and the tape clicked off. There was something in the easy certainty of those two voices that I can hardly bear. They were not hoping we would stay close. They were not worried about it. They simply knew it. The way you know the sun will come up, with the total unearned confidence of the young, who cannot imagine that anything as solid as that bond could ever be eroded by anything as ordinary as life. We're the Walsh girls, as if that were a law of physics, as if loving each other that much at 15 and 18 were a guarantee that came with the relationship, rather than a fire that two people have to keep feeding, log by log, call by call, visit by visit, for the rest of their lives, or it goes out. Those girls did not know that love is not a guarantee. It is a practice. Nobody had told them yet. Nobody had told me. Always. We promise. Other people drift apart, but not us. I sat on that attic floor at 63 years old, having spoken to my sister for 15 minutes twice in the last year, and I listened to the two of us promise the exact opposite of the life we had actually gone on to live. We had become the other people. We had become precisely the cautionary tale those two confident girls swore we would never be, and I could not even blame Linda for it, which is part of what made it so hard. There was no version of the story where she was the negligent one, and I was the wronged one. We had drifted in perfect, symmetrical fairness. Every unmade call was a call I could just as easily have made. Every unvisited year, a year I could have gotten on a plane, being, of all things, a travel agent. The drift was not done to me. I did it, exactly as much as she did. Every single day that I told myself I would call Linda this weekend, and then didn't, and then felt the small relief of having gotten through another week without the slightly awkward effort of reaching across all that accumulated distance. We had both chosen the small comfort of not reaching, 1,000 times each, until the not reaching became the whole relationship. And the worst part, the part that truly broke me, was that we had not even fought our way there. We had just let go, quietly, without ever deciding to. I need to try to explain the particular grief of that afternoon, because it was unlike any I had felt before. When you lose someone to death, there is at least a reason, a finality, something outside your control. When you lose someone to a fight, there is at least a story, a villain, a wound you can point to. But Linda and I had lost each other to nothing at all, to busyness, to distance, to the assumption, made by both of us every single year, that there would always be more time, that we could always reconnect later, that the bond from our childhood was so strong it did not need tending. We had treated the most precious relationship of our early lives like it was unbreakable, and so we had stopped doing the small things, the calls, the visits, the showing up, that were the only things that had ever kept it alive. And it had not broken with a snap. It had simply faded, like that ballpoint handwriting on the cassette label, until one day I looked up, and my sister was a stranger I happened to be related to, and neither of us could say when it had happened, because it had happened on no particular day. It had happened on all of them. I tried, sitting there, to find the year it went wrong, and I couldn't, because there wasn't one. There was no year Linda and I stopped being close. There was just a year I realized we no longer were. And that year was long after the actual drifting had quietly done its work. I could see the mechanism of it now, looking back with the tape still warm in my hands. Each individual instance had been so reasonable. The Christmas we didn't travel because the kids had the flu. The summer the visit didn't happen because money was tight. The call I let go to voicemail because I was tired, figuring I'd call back tomorrow, and tomorrow there was something else. Not one of those decisions was wrong. Not one of them, on its own, cost us anything. But they accumulated the way snow accumulates, each flake weightless, until the roof comes down. 40 years of reasonable, individually harmless choices to not quite reach, and the sum of them was two strangers who used to be sisters. I sat with that tape for a long time. And then I did the math that the tape forced on me, the cold arithmetic of it. I am a travel agent by trade, or I was, and so I think in itineraries, in the practical mechanics of getting a person from where they are to where the people they love are. And sitting on that attic floor, I did the kind of calculation I had done 10,000 times for clients and never once for myself. Phoenix is a 2-hour flight from Billings. 2 hours. For 40 years, the woman who knew me before anyone else on Earth had been a 2-hour flight away, and I had booked honeymooners to Hawaii and retirees to Rome and families to Disney World, sending strangers across oceans to be with the people who mattered to them, while the person who mattered most to me sat 2 hours south, and I never once made the booking for myself. I had spent my whole career closing the distance between other people and their loved ones. It had genuinely never occurred to me to close my own. That was the arithmetic that got me to the phone. 2 hours. 40 years. The numbers did not survive being looked at directly. Linda was 66. I was 63. Our mother had died at 74. Whatever time the two of us had left to be sisters was not the endless ocean those girls on the tape had assumed. It was a small, countable thing now, and I had a choice. I could put the cassette back in the box and let the drift finish its work, and one day one of us would get a phone call about the other, and I would stand at a funeral knowing I had let 40 years go by 4 states away from the one person who had known me my whole life. Or I could pick up the phone on a day that was not her birthday or mine and try to keep a promise 2 girls made in 1978. My hands were actually shaking when I dialed. Isn't that something? I sat there with the phone in my hand for a full 10 minutes before I could press the last digit. I rehearsed what I would say. I worried she would be cold, or busy, or worse, politely warm in that distant Christmas card way that would tell me the drift had gone too far to reverse. I worried she would wonder what I wanted, would wait for me to get to the real reason for the call, because in our world calls had reasons, and the reason was never simply you. 40 years of not reaching had built a wall so high that climbing it, even towards someone I loved, even with a cassette full of proof that we had once been everything to each other, felt genuinely frightening. And I think that is worth sitting with for a moment. How absurd and how true it is that it can become scary to call your own sister. That distance, given enough time, can make strangers of the people who once shared your bedroom and your every secret. The wall is real, but I want you to know what I learned the moment she picked up, that the wall, however high it had grown, was made of nothing. It came down in a single phone call. 40 years of it, gone in one laugh. 63 years old, calling my own sister, and my hands were shaking like a teenager's, because somewhere in those 40 years, it had become frightening to reach for her. Because reaching means admitting the distance and risking that she might not reach back. Linda answered on the third ring, and I could hear the wariness in her. Hello, Mo? Because I was not supposed to be calling. It was not a birthday. And in our drifted little world, an unscheduled call could only mean bad news. And I did not know how to do this gracefully, so I just did it plainly. I said, Lynn, I'm not calling because anything's wrong. I was cleaning the attic and I found a tape. It's us, doing our radio show, from 1978. There was a silence on the line, and then I heard my 66-year-old sister make a sound I had not heard in 40 years. That specific laugh, the one from the tape, surprised out of her. I said, Lynn, you made me promise something on it. Do you remember? And she said very quietly, We never lose each other. She remembered. She had remembered the whole time. That was the thing that finished me, on the call. Not that I remembered the promise, but that she did too. That she had been carrying those same words for 40 years on her side of the silence. We had both kept the memory, and neither of us had kept the promise. Each of us privately treasuring a vow we were each privately breaking, every single day, by not calling. 2 women, 4 states apart, both holding the same 18-year-old's voice in their hearts, both too afraid to be the one who reached. If that is not the saddest and most fixable thing in the world, I do not know what is. Sad, because we wasted so long. Fixable, because all it ever needed was for one of us to be brave enough to dial. It turned out the promise had never really died. It had just been waiting, like the tape, for someone to press play. And then we were both crying, 4 states apart, 2 old women on a telephone, finally saying the thing we had been not saying for 4 decades. I miss you. I'm sorry. How did we let this happen? Linda said something on that call that I have held on to ever since. She said through her tears, I thought you didn't need me anymore. I thought you had your life, and I'd just fallen out of it, and that you were fine with that. And I realized, with a jolt, that she had spent 40 years believing a story about me that was the exact mirror of the story I had believed about her. I had thought Linda was busy and content and did not have room for me. She had thought the same about me. Each of us had read the other's silence as indifference, when in truth it was just the same fear and the same inertia wearing the same disguise. Neither of us had drifted because we stopped caring. We had drifted because each of us assumed the other one had, and so neither dared to reach, because reaching towards someone you believe has moved on is the most frightening reach there is. 40 years of mutual mirror image misunderstanding, and one phone call was enough to dissolve it, because it turned out we had never stopped loving each other at all. We had only stopped believing that the other one still did. We talked for 3 hours. And the remarkable thing about those 3 hours was how little we had to rebuild from scratch. I had braced myself for awkwardness, for the labor of getting to know a stranger again, but that is not what happened. What happened was more like clearing dust off something that had been there the whole time. Underneath 40 years of distance, the two girls from the tape were still in there, both of us, and they recognized each other instantly. Linda still finished my sentences. I still knew, from a quarter second of silence, exactly what she was not saying. The shorthand of a shared childhood, it turns out, does not expire. It just gets buried. And the moment we started really talking, it came right back up through the years, like it had been waiting. That gave me a strange, fierce hope. It meant the drift had not destroyed the thing itself. It had only buried it. And buried things can be dug back up, as long as both people are still alive to hold the shovels. 3 hours after years of 15-minute increments. And before we hung up, we made a new promise, and this time, being old enough to know what promises cost, we meant it differently. We meant we would actually do the work. That word, work, mattered. Because the promise those girls made in 1978 had been made in the language of feeling. We'll never lose each other. As if staying close were a matter of loving each other enough, and we had loved each other plenty and lost each other anyway. So the new promise Linda and I made on the phone that night was different. It was not about feeling, it was about behavior. We promised each other specific, unglamorous things. A phone call every Sunday, no matter what. A visit twice a year, booked in advance, treated as non-negotiable as a doctor's appointment. We had learned, the hard and expensive way, that love does not maintain a relationship. Logistics do. The Sunday call does. The plane ticket does. The showing up does. Two girls who loved each other completely had drifted into strangers, which proved that love was never the missing ingredient. The missing ingredient was the boring, deliberate, scheduled work of staying in each other's lives. And at 63 and 66, we finally understood that, and finally agreed to do it. That was last year. I want to tell you what has happened since, because this is the part those two girls on the tape would have wanted me to get to. I have seen my sister 3 times in the last year, more than in the previous decade combined. I flew to Arizona, she flew to Montana. We met in the middle once, in Las Vegas. 2 old ladies giggling in a hotel like we were 15 again. On that Vegas trip, something happened that I will never forget. We were out at dinner and Linda said something, and I laughed. Really laughed. That helpless snorting laugh from the tape. And a young waitress smiled at us and said, "You two must be best friends, you can tell." And Linda looked at her and said simply, "She's my sister." And I watched my sister's face as she said it, the pride in it, the gladness, and I thought, we almost never got this back. We almost let it stay buried. A stranger looked at us and saw instantly what 40 years of drift had hidden even from us. That we were two people who lit up in each other's company, who belonged together, who were obviously, visibly each other's person. It had been true the whole time. It had just been waiting under the silence for someone to play the tape. We talk every Sunday now, not 15 minutes, but however long it takes. And slowly, week by week, Linda is becoming my sister again instead of my Christmas card. It is not the same as if we had never drifted. You cannot get the 40 years back, and we both know it. And sometimes that knowledge sits heavy between us. We talk about it openly now, the lost time, which I think is the only healthy thing to do with it. We do not pretend it did not happen. We grieve it together, actually. The holidays we spent apart, the children of ours who barely know their cousins, the decades of small daily closeness that simply did not occur and cannot be recovered. There is a real sorrow in reuniting this late, a sorrow that a tidier story would leave out, and I will not leave it out, because anyone in my position should know it comes with the reunion. But here is what we have decided about that sorrow. It is the price of having waited, and the only thing worse than paying it would be to let the regret over the lost 40 years poison the years we have left. So we feel the grief when it comes, and then we set it down, and we get on with the work of being sisters again. The lost time is real. it is also finally behind us. What is in front of us is ours to not waste twice. But what we have left, we are no longer wasting. And I did one more thing. I had the cassette digitized, and I made Linda a copy. And we each have those two young voices now, that promise, in our pockets on our phones. She told me she listens to it when she misses me, and then she just calls. We have a little ritual now, the two of us, that came out of all this. On the first Sunday of every month, we play the tape, both of us at the same time, on the phone together. Those two young voices filling both our houses, 4 states apart. And we just listen to who we were, and then we talk as who we are. It has become the most precious hour of my month. Sometimes we laugh at how silly we were. Sometimes one of us goes quiet, and the other knows it is because the years we lost are sitting there in the room. But mostly, it just reminds us, every single month, to keep the new promise instead of the broken one. The girls on that tape gave us a gift they could not have understood at 15 and 18. They gave their tired, drifted, 60-something selves a way back to each other. I think about thanking them sometimes, those two girls, and then I realize the only way to thank them is to do what they asked, to not lose each other, to call, to show up, always. The thing we promised, finally being kept, 45 years late. The tape did what those girls hoped it would do, 45 years later than they imagined. It brought the Walsh girls back to each other. It just took us getting old and nearly out of time to finally listen to it. I want to leave you with the two things this taught me. The first is about the danger of the drift, because it is so much more common than the dramatic ruptures we worry about. Most of us are vigilant about betrayal and falling out, and rightly so. But far more relationships are lost to nothing at all, to distance, to busyness, to the quiet assumption that a strong bond does not need tending. The drift has no villain, no fight, no moment you can point to, which is exactly why it is so deadly. There is never a crisis that forces you to fix it, so you never do. And one ordinary year blurs into the next until the person is gone from your life without either of you deciding it. So I am asking you to look at the people you have let drift. The sibling, the old friend, the relative you assume will always be there. The bond being strong is not a reason to neglect it. It is the reason to protect it. The second thing is simpler, and it is the one I most need you to hear, because I got lucky and most people don't. The voices you ache for are very often still alive, still 4 states away, still just a phone call you are too proud or too scared or too busy to make. I found out what I was missing while my sister was still here to call. Most people find the cassette, the photo, the letter, the reminder of who they used to be to each other, after the funeral, when the only thing left to do with it is grieve. I got to pick up the phone instead. So if there is someone you have drifted from, someone whose voice you would give anything to hear if it were gone, understand that it is not gone yet, and stop waiting for the perfect moment, because there isn't one. Just call. Be the one who reaches first. Keep the promise while there is still someone on the other end to keep it with. If this story landed for you, drop the word cassette in the comments below. I read them. It tells me which stories are worth telling next. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one, before I go. First, fear the drift more than the fight. We all guard against betrayals and blow-ups, but far more relationships are lost to nothing at all, to distance, busyness, and the quiet assumption that a strong bond will hold without tending. The drift has no villain and no single bad day, and that is exactly what makes it so dangerous. No crisis ever forces you to repair it, so you never do, and the years blur by until the person is simply gone from your life, without either of you ever choosing it. Look hard at whoever you have let drift. A sibling, an old friend, a relative you assume will always be there. A bond being strong is not permission to neglect it. It is the very reason to protect it. Second, reach first, now, while the voice is still on the other end. The people you ache for are usually still alive, still reachable, still just a phone call you keep not making out of pride or fear or habit. I learned what I'd been missing while my sister was still here to call. Most people learn it after the funeral, when the photo or the letter or the old tape can only be grieved over. I got to pick up the phone instead. If you have drifted from someone whose voice you would give anything to hear if it were gone, hear me. It is not gone yet. Stop waiting for a perfect moment that will never come. Just call. Be the one who reaches first. Some of the voices you ache for are still just a phone call away. Call, before they're only a tape. Some of the voices you ache for are still just a phone call away. Call, before they're only a tape. I'll see you next time.